It's fascinating how in India, when something really big happens, a major national crisis, I mean, it feels like the whole conversation shifts almost overnight.
That's right. The usual noise, the everyday arguments,
Hmm.
they just seem to quiet down.
Exactly. And one thing that really seems to fade uh, is this focus on fifth columnists.
Ah, the internal enemy. A hidden threat.
Yeah, those people supposedly undermining everything from the inside, like termites you can't quite see.
It's a powerful idea, that hidden adversary working against us while we face something else. Very potent.
Super potent. And the name itself, fifth columnist, it comes from that Spanish Civil War story, right? The general saying he had four columns marching on Madrid.
And a fifth one already inside the city, ready to cause trouble.
Precisely. It paints such a vivid picture, and we definitely see that label used here in India.
Oh, absolutely. In, let's say, normal times, it gets thrown around quite a bit
Yeah.
against opponents, critics, journalists, anyone questioning the narrative, really.
It creates this very clear us and them.
Very effective for mobilization, defining the in-group. But the really interesting part, as you said, is what happens when a real undeniable crisis hits.
Yeah, what happens to the fifth columnists then? It seems like they almost vanish.
They kind of become obsolete, don't they? Like the national focus just snaps elsewhere.
Right. It's like our core argument here.
Yeah.
When India faces a genuine crisis, a war, an economic meltdown, a huge natural disaster, this whole idea of the internal enemy, the fifth columnist, it just loses its grip.
The priority becomes survival. Unity for survival.
That collective self-preservation instinct kicks in.
Exactly. All that energy spent on suspicion, on pointing fingers inward, it starts to feel, well, like a waste, a dangerous waste even.
You saw it so clearly with COVID in 2020. Remember those first few months? The fear was immense.
Absolutely terrifying, uncertainty everywhere.
But then you had neighbors sharing food, complete strangers organizing plasma donations online.
Spontaneous solidarity. Even online where things can get so toxic, you saw a shift towards sharing useful info, helping people find oxygen or beds.
It was like the shared threat just bulldozed some of those divisions.
It's a classic common enemy effect. And it's not unique to the pandemic. Think about the Kargil War in '99.
Oh, the national unity then was incredible.
Wasn't it? Everyone rallying behind the troops, Bollywood stars fundraising, kids writing letters. The focus was entirely external, on the enemy at the gates.
Nobody was really talking about traitors within during Kargil. The threat was obvious, external.
And it's not just war. Look at the 2004 tsunami. Catastrophic.
Yeah.
Tamil Nadu, the Andamans,
Devastating. But the response?
an incredible outpouring. Fishermen becoming rescuers because they knew the waters, temples, mosques, churches opening their doors as shelters, volunteers rushing in from all over.
The usual lines, social, political, they just seemed irrelevant in that moment. It was about helping, pure and simple.
So why? Why do these fifth columnists lose their mojo, let's say, in a crisis?
Well, for one, the spotlight just moves, right? In normal times, maybe they're convenient scapegoats for problems.
Things are bad because of them.
Exactly. But when a virus is spreading, or an earthquake hits, or there's an actual invasion, that's the headline. That's the real threat.
Everything else seems trivial. Like you said, arguing about paint colors while the house is flooding. The comparison feels apt.
The focus shifts, and then unity becomes just practical.
Absolutely. You need to cooperate to survive. Think about the Uttarakhand floods in 2013.
Yeah, total chaos.
You had locals, stranded tourists, the army. Everyone had to work together. There was no time for loyalty tests.
No checking someone's nationalist credentials before pulling them out of the water.
Precisely. It wasn't about whose side are you on. It was, can you help? How do we get through this?
Which changes the whole story, the narrative.
Right. The dominant question switches from who's betraying us to how do we survive this? How do we rebuild?
And even the media, with all its flaws, often pivots. They start highlighting the heroes, the frontline workers, the community volunteers.
Though, we should add the caveat that some might still try to push divisive stuff, even then. But the main current changes.
True. And there's also a political risk, isn't there, in accusing people during a crisis?
Definitely. Public emotions are high. People are suffering. Pointing fingers at internal enemies when everyone's focused on survival can backfire badly.
Bad PR, basically. Leaders often tone it down. It's just smarter politics to call for unity.
It's like an unspoken rule. Now is not the time. And India's history backs this up, this sort of crisis playbook.
Like the 1962 war with China. A defeat, yes, and India was unprepared.
But the reaction wasn't mass finger pointing inwards. It was this huge surge of patriotism, people donating gold, Money.
Focus on the external threat.
Always.
Mm.
Or 1971, the Bangladesh Liberation War. Huge undertaking, fighting a war and managing a massive refugee crisis.
An immense challenge.
And again, the national energy was on the war effort, on the humanitarian aid, not really on hunting for dissenters within. Indira Gandhi's leadership was key there too, keeping things focused.
And more recently, the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Horrific.
Truly awful, but the story that emerged.
Resilience, courage, Mumbaikars helping each other, the police response, the hotel staff.
It was about standing defiant against terror, not about internal betrayal.
So these moments show this tendency, when things get really bad, for India to pull together. The internal squabbles just fade in importance.
They recede, yeah. Which brings us to now, May 2025. We still face big challenges.
Economic slowdown, climate change impacts, border stuff.
And yeah, the fifth columnist label hasn't disappeared, especially online. It's still there.
But when you look at responses to actual recent crises,
That pattern holds. Take climate change, those Kerala floods, the heat waves in Rajasthan. What do you see?
communities helping each other, local adaptation efforts.
Exactly. Or Cyclone Amphan in West Bengal in 2024. Terrible damage, lives lost.
$13 billion in damage, over 100 deaths. Huge.
But the response? Volunteers, NGOs, government agencies working side by side. The focus was relief, rebuilding, not blaming anti-nationals.
It's hard to keep that narrative going when people are literally saving their neighbors.
Very hard. And even with things like economic struggles, the farmer protests a while back, gig workers organizing now.
The focus is mostly on solutions, right? Fair deals, better conditions, not primarily about who's loyal and who's not.
It's about survival, about livelihoods, and globally, too, India's playing its role, the G20 summit last year. Complex diplomacy.
Sure, there's criticism, always is. But the main conversation is about India's place in the world, not usually about internal subversion holding us back on the global stage.
It almost makes you wonder about our fascination with villains in the first place.
It's like we need them, doesn't it? Like a Bollywood movie needs a bad guy. Political popcorn.
Yeah, maybe it simplifies things, gives us someone to blame, but the irony is...
When a real crisis hits, the crisis becomes the villain.
Exactly. The virus, the flood, the enemy. That's the antagonist. Suddenly you don't need to invent internal ones as much.
And maybe sometimes the real fifth column isn't people at all.
What do you mean?
Well, think about that oxygen crisis during COVID's second wave. Was the problem really hidden saboteurs? Or was it?
Logistics, bureaucracy, systemic failures.
Exactly. Internal inefficiencies. Sometimes maybe that's the real hidden enemy doing the damage.
That's a really sharp point. Shifting the focus from imagined traitors to actual tangible problems within the system.
And the data seems to back up the unity idea, too. Pew Research in 2020 found most Indians felt more united during the pandemic.
Right, and they valued those community efforts. And that CSDS Lagniti survey in 2021
People trusted local volunteers and NGOs more than political leaders in the crisis.
shows where people turn when things get real. Not just rhetoric, but action on the ground.
And Gallup in 2023 finding stronger social bonds after disasters like Cyclone Amphan.
It all points to this tendency. When push comes to shove, communities often band together. The fifth columnist idea just doesn't fit that picture.
We need to be careful not to overstate it, right? This unity isn't always permanent.
No, definitely not. It can be very temporary. Once the immediate danger passes.
The old divisions can creep back in. The fifth columnist narrative can make a comeback.
Look at Pulwama in 2019. First, that wave of national mourning, shared grief.
Absolutely unified, initially.
But then, pretty quickly, the political polarization returned. Accusations of being soft on terror, that kind of thing.
Unity fractured.
Or the CAA protests in 2019-20. It started partly about refugees, but soon became this intense loyal versus anti-national fight.
And students, activists, they got branded as fifth columnists.
So a crisis might pause the divisions, create temporary unity, but it doesn't magically erase them forever. The potential for that narrative is always there, waiting to be reactivated.
So summing up, it seems the main takeaway is that major crises in India tend to trigger this shift towards unity and collective action.
Yeah, the focus moves away from hunting internal enemies and towards tackling the immediate tangible threat. Survival and mutual help become paramount.
The fifth columnist just isn't the priority then.
Not really. India definitely has its flaws, bureaucratic hurdles, all that, but there's this underlying resilience, this ability to come together when it really counts.
The energy gets redirected from finding traitors to finding solutions.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final thought. Maybe Is the energy spent looking for traitors within during normal times actually helpful? Or could it be better used addressing the real concrete challenges India faces every day?
Perhaps the whole idea of the fifth columnist, especially when things get truly serious, is more of a distraction than anything else.
Something to think about.